QualityForge would like to introduce you to the next guest speaker of the event, Adrián Bolonio. Adrián is a senior accessibility software engineer at Miro. By closely collaborating with people with disabilities as well as collaborating with teams across Miro, Adrián is actively participating in the analysis of accessibility issues, doing his research and determining solutions requirements in order to make more accessible products. In a nutshell, Adrián is working on making the internet a better and more accessible place for everyone. Today, he will be talking about design systems and how to use them in an accessible way.
Welcome to the stage, Adrián.
Thank you very much. So today I'm going to talk about design systems. But first, let me do a small disclaimer. So if you're posting any picture in any social network about this conference or any other conference, please add description to your images. Otherwise, you will end up posting something about accessibility with no description. So please do so.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so let me introduce myself very quick. Yeah, so I'm Adrián. I'm a software engineer at Miro. You can find me in Twitter or in my website. And today I'm going to talk about design systems. And it is very difficult sometimes to define what design system is. And you can find some things like is a repository of components, or is a collection of components, or similar definitions. And this is what most of the people see about design systems, so components, layouts. But there is much more components and artifacts from a design system. So brand, identity, voice and tone, writing styles, foundations. And we're going to talk about some of them today, but it is true that we are going to focus a bit more on components. So let's talk about tokens. And you might have this system that fits into your corporate image, right? So maybe your corporate image is orange and white with tones on green. So maybe your component library looks like this one, and then you might be creating those components with those colors. But some users will see this in a different way, and some other users will see it in a completely different other way because they are colorblind. So what you can do not to fix that, but to make it even better, instead of conditionally changing it, is use tokens. So tokens are name and value pairings that represent small decisions. It could be a color, it could be a font size, it could be spacing. And what is powerful about tokens is that we can create themes and modes. And when we talk about themes and mode, then I guess you're all thinking of the same, which is light and dark mode. This is the first thing that we talk about. The first thing that we think when we talk about themes and modes, right? But we can do much more with that. We have a lot other need for a completely different type of user. So we can create high contrast mode, we can create colorblind mode, and as well, we can include patterns to support the choice of colors. We cannot rely only on colors. I think this is something that we've been repeating in development. And the nice thing about that is that without losing our corporate image in design system, we can create a set of different modes and themes. The only thing, or one of the things that are important here, is that you should always respect the user preferences. So if a user said, I want dark mode, next time I get into your application, I want the dark mode. The same as if I want the high contrast mode. And we need to be very clear that you can change those modes and themes over the app settings. And as well, about tokens, the themes are always changing. We can change from dark to high contrast, but the tokens stays the same. So when a designer tells you that this is the token name, we can change the value. As I said, it was a pair of key value. The key is always the same, but the values are changing. So that's how we can create those themes and modes. As I said, components are a big artifact of a design system. And we're going to talk about some components and probably the most commonly used components in a design system. And let's see how can we use them correctly or not. But first, I've heard sometimes a couple of sentences that are funny enough. So something like, "Oh, yeah, our components are accessible," which is not really true, and we are gonna see in a bit why this cannot be true. Or even better, our components are accessible. So if we use them, yeah, our application will be accessible. Sometimes there is an extra thing by default. So our components are accessible by default. So if we use them to build our application, then it's accessible by our components. So this is not really true. And again, we're going to see in a bit why and how to change this sentence in a better way. So as I said, maybe the most common components that you're going to use are images, buttons, and like very atomic components. So let's talk about the image component. And we know that every image that we put in our website or our web application must have a description using the alt attribute. And it can be, though, empty if the image is decorative, but if we have something like that we have an image of a car, then we can have a description, like a red car with a back door open. Maybe you're developing a selling car application, right? And we know that this alt attribute, when is there, when it's not empty and it's not a decorative image, should be meaningful enough and contain the description of the image. So in this case, it's a red car with the back door open. So I think it's very clear that that this is the description of the image. But we can use those components in a very wrong way. For example, for SEO purposes. So I've seen this before. This is not an invented case. I've seen some websites using the alt text or the alt attribute to put just keywords. It is very good for SEO, don't take me wrong. It is very, very wrong for accessibility, because someone using a safe text technology, specifically a screen reader, this is what the screen reader will read, what's going to read when this image is focused, and that's not really what the image is about. So this is a very nice example on how to use a design system component in a wrong way. Let me tell you a bit more about that. So button is an atomic component that we're going to use a lot. We have interactive elements in our web applications, and buttons are part of them. And the thumb rule, at least what I normally do, is when I need to choose if I need to use a button or a link, is button perform an action. So buttons perform actions, and links take you somewhere, change the route of your application. So when we can make a lot of our web application when we use the correct semantic HTML elements, and they have the purpose of it. So whenever we use a button, then it's easy. We can use an on-click handler to handle the action that is going to be performed by this button and the content of the button. But sometimes we give so much freedom about the use of the button that we can include not valid HTML semantics into a button. In this case, we are using a div, or I've seen them, and again, this is not invented, I've seen this using headings even inside a button. What we need to understand is the only permitted content of a button element is phrasing. So maybe a span or a paragraph, or even better, nothing, just like in the first example. So even if a design system component allow me to use whatever as a content, that doesn't mean that I can use whatever I want as a content. In this case, it is allowed by the design system component API, or the way that this component is built, to include whatever as a content of the button. But we need to understand the implications of using different semantics when using this component. For example, with empty buttons, in this case, we have a button that has only an icon, and we can do that, and it will not be an error, or at least semantically an error. But we need to understand that whenever a screen reader will focus, this interactive element will not announce the purpose of this button. So that's why we need to have an accessible name for all interactive elements, and we can use this. We can do this using the ARIA label attribute, in this case, to, again, explain the purpose of this button and the action that is going to be performed when this button is either clicked or pressed via keyboard. So it is very clear now that this button will remove a task. And now that we've seen this icon here, and of course, this same behavior applies to empty links, like social media profile links. Maybe you have the icon of a social network, and then you want to add an ARIA label to say, go to my social network profile. But now that we're talking about the icon, when using an icon, in this case for an empty button, or it could be used as a decorative ink icon, maybe an info bubble, in those cases, you would like to hide it to assistive technologies like in screen reader. So in combination with the empty button, using an ARIA label to explain the purpose and the action, and using ARIA hidden to hide the icon to the assisted technology, you're going to use those two components together in the most accessible way. Because you're not only explaining the action, but as well you're hiding something that is not relevant for the screen reader, like this icon without title. So those are the small things that can enhance the experience when using components on your library. So design system components, what is the best way to do them? Well, make them very easy to use them correctly, but make them very difficult to use them wrongly. What I mean with that is create compulsory props for your components, properties for your components. So whenever a consumer is going to use a component, it's going to give an error if I don't pass a alt attribute to the image, or I don't give an on-click handler to a button, or I don't give a ARIA label to a drop-down menu trigger because it might be an empty button. So those are the things that will make you use them correctly very easy, but as well make them very difficult to use it wrongly, like maybe type safe. So maybe a button should not accept anything and maybe only use phrasing components. So in this case, the consumer will have enough freedom, but in the best way possible. There is another aspect of a design system, or at least a library, which is patterns and behaviors. And what I mean with patterns and behaviors, I mean focus trap, ARIA disable instead of using the disable attribute, or theming. In this case, if we use them, or if we create them, it can be reused across the main application. But please test them before including them. Maybe the best way is, if you use Storybook, maybe create stories explaining these patterns and testing them, or maybe use prototype apps. Maybe you can create a small app testing those focus trap in a menu, or ARIA disable when you want to disable buttons. Those will avoid, or will allow you to avoid extending those bad practices all over your application. So we had this sentence of our components are accessible, which we said is not true. Our components are not accessible, are accessible ready. So they can be used in an accessible way, but they can be used very wrongly. So our components are accessible ready. So if we use them correctly, our application will be accessible. Actually, it might be accessible because there's a bunch of other things that are affecting our application. Maybe the browser API, the way that we use the browser, and the browser that we use. Not every screen reader or assistive technology will interpret and read everything in the same way. So we want to use them in a correct way, use them in an accessible way, but as well, we want to test them in different environments, browsers, screen readers, operating systems, devices, etc. So don't rely only on our components are accessible ready and I use them correctly. Why our application is not accessible is because you need to treat this as a one thing with building blocks inside. And one essential part of a design system is the documentation. This is the way that you have to tell the consumers of components, of layouts, tokens, the foundations, brand and company identity, to tell them how to use them. So the best documentation will answer questions like, how do I use this component in an accessible way? What are the best practices when using this component, pattern, or behavior? Or how do I use these components together? We've seen using a button and an icon together. How do I use them together? Again, we talk about ARIA label plus ARIA hidden. Or when and how do I use this pattern? When is the best opportunity to use a focus trap in a dialogue, but maybe not in a form? So those are things that should be included in the documentation. Where can I read more about this topic? Maybe you want to give links to the W3C pattern library or the specifications or the WCAG success criteria about the topic that we're talking about. Or what is the keyboard navigation of this component? I have a menu and I want to know if I need to move across using the arrow keys or not. And this is built in the component. Should I use a pattern already, a hook, or should I build it my own when using this component? So those are questions, some questions that there is the documentation of not only the components, but all your design systems should be answering. So how can we create this documentation, or what is the best way that we can use this documentation? So when you have, maybe you have a website, a web application, a portal where you have the documentation on the usage of your components and patterns for all your engineering team. Every component, every pattern should have an accessibility and usability section with guidelines, with do's and don'ts, and external documentation. As I said, in this case, this is an example of Primer, the design system of GitHub. Or maybe you have a storybook, as I said, as a showcase for your components. You can play around with them, but please create stories only for accessibility purposes. So if you create a button and then you create your primary, your secondary buttons as well, please create a story for disable and the differences between disable attribute and ARIA disable, when to use one and when to use the other one. So like this, an engineer will play around, but at least they will see how to use them in the most accessible way. So as well, if you find it difficult to understand or have a lack of documentation using a component, a pattern, or a behavior, please extend the documentation as you would like to have it. Even if you're not part of the design system team, I assure you that the rest of the engineering team will appreciate that you extend the documentation, make it better. Let's embrace the Scout rule. Instead of campground, in this case, we always need to leave the code and the documentation cleaner and clearer that you found it. And I think, again, everyone in the engineering team, even product team and design team, will appreciate that you extend the documentation. That was a bit of tips on not only how to use a design system in the most accessible way or maybe in the best way, but as well on it opens a discussion within the engineering team and the design team. I have not talked about design annotation when you're creating the component even before the implementation. Maybe the ideation part of these components that we need to think about what is the keyboard navigation or what is the screen reader announcement that we are going to use. This is how to create a design system. In this case, I want to show you how to use the components, and you need to understand again that you can use components, patterns, and behaviors in a correct way or very wrongly. And as I mentioned just now, the documentation is the essential part that is going to educate and teach you how to use them in that correct way. So that's why we need to point a lot in those documentation stories, examples, and as well, maybe talk about this Slack channels, guilds that we have in our companies. Show and share your experiences and examples. You can find me as well in my website. I write some blog posts about accessibility, and I want to leave with a couple of sentences that I think they summarize a bit the importance of accessibility. And we all do this because we don't treat accessibility as a feature, and I think this has been said a lot during the last times. But let's stop thinking about accessibility as a post process and include the accessibility from the very beginning: ideation, design, and implementation in this order, but as well from the ideation. Whenever we think about a feature in our applications, in our website, then think about how is it going to be when a keyboard navigation user use it, or how is the screen reader announcement will be for these features. So think about this from the very beginning and don't treat it as a post process, because later never happens and we cannot do this afterwards. And one thing that we need to understand as well, that I think is a bit of a mistake when we think or when we say that we develop digital products for the company, right? I work for this company and I develop for this company. It's not really true. We develop digital products for other humans, and the companies are, or the company that we work for, or even our company itself, is just a channel, is the channel to arrive to other humans. And if we think that the product that you are building will be used by some other human, then we start developing this empathy on, okay, maybe I am using it like this, but some other user, customer, human will use it in a different way. We don't know. And since we don't know our users and the user and the customer that is going to use our application, the only way to do a quality product is doing it for everyone. And doing it for everyone means doing it accessible for everyone. And if we start thinking like this, then we have a huge path already covered. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adrian, for the end message. I also enjoyed the point you made about the documentation. Well, if you need the documentation, the extended documentation, just do it, because it can become much worse if you don't have the documentation.
Yeah, at the end, if you needed it, it's very probable that some of your colleague will need it as well. So you're probably not the only one who thinks that, oh, there's a lack of documentation. It will be not logical to say, okay, it's a lack of documentation, but I will leave it like this. So the next one will find exactly the same problem as I find. So
Exactly, yes.
Wonderful. So we'll go straight into our first question here. And that it's a broader one. Where do you find inspiration for the projects you're working on?
Well, I think part of the motivation and the inspiration is the topic that I mentioned at the very end. So what I normally think is what I'm building now is for some other user. So I'm not building this for my company. Someone like a human is going to use what I'm building. I don't know this human. I don't know who's going to use this one. So the only way that I have it to make it very good and with quality is to make it for everyone, to make it accessible for everyone. So as this is one part, which is much moral or in the moral way. As well, I'm a software engineer. I like to create a very good and tech excellent, right? So if you want to make it technically good, it needs to be accessible. You need to create it using the correct semantics. You need to understand why you're creating those semantics, and you need to use the tools that you have. Your design system team provides you with a tool set, a lot of artifacts, a design system component library, patterns, behaviors, voice and tone. You cannot create a component like you want. You have a guidelines and tools. So if you use it correctly, it's going to be technically good with a lot of quality and morally correct. So it's for everyone. And I think this is the combination of the inspiration.
All right. So the next question is a bit about the new regulations that will come into force in 2025. How will they impact your daily work?
So luckily and fortunately enough, there's new regulations that will come, and this is going to affect everyone. And now we are experiencing that companies are taking accessibility more seriously because of that, which is a pity and not. It is a pity because some companies are going to do this because they don't want to lose money, they don't want to be fined. But in the other side, then they are going to do it. So if they build an accessibility team and they care about this, and if they put the seed on creating the team, educating their engineering teams, then it's not going to be a one-time thing. It's only for the European Act. Is going to be a path that is going to be from now on our applications and our products are accessible, and I'm happy with that.
Okay. And if there was one message you would like to deliver to companies that own digital products, what would it be?
If you do your products in an accessible way, more users will want to use it. And I'm not talking about people with disabilities or user with disabilities. I said more users. I'm a heavy user of tabbing around a website or filling forms with a tab. I watch videos with subtitles when I don't hear correct, or maybe I am in the public transport. So I would like to use a product that I can use in an accessible way, even if I don't have a big disability. So again, if you create products that are more accessible, then more users will like to use it. So I think you will increase your user base.
Fantastic.
Wonderful.
So people are appreciating your insightful lecture in the comments section. And there's also a question from Richards.
Given Miro's business, which is enabling users to create custom designs, graphs, charts, etc., do you have any features that enable better accessibility within those designs created? So multi-layer.
Yeah. So here at Miro, we have a collaborative application, and then it is very visual. So the way that we have to enhance the user experience is to create two main things in the best way possible, which is the keyboard navigation. So how you navigate across your Miro board, and what is the information that we are delivering to, for example, screen reader users. So whenever you have an image, then you will have the alt text. Whenever you have graphs, you can have descriptions, and etc. Of course, this is a path and this is a process that we are following, and we have a lot of teams working in different widgets. Very interactive. The way that we work with them is to let them understand the importance on conveying information to the user when the user is focusing or using this interactive widget like graphs or prototypes. So we are working on delivering the information to screen reader or assisted technologies in the best way possible and in the most concise possible. So giving the creators fields like descriptions, alt attribute, or the image description for images, etc. So whenever a creator creates a new widget, they can add the information for the consumers.
Okay.
Very insightful.
Thank you for your answers. Thank you for the presentation. It was a pleasure having you here.
And we have a lot of positive feedback in our live chat from other software engineers who are very much appreciative of everything you've said today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, Adrián.
Thank you so much.
Hopefully see you in the future.
Have a great
Definitely.
day.
Bye.